Well, greetings everybody. As usual, we'll say the prayer for teacher and student. We can say it together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Well, as you may know, tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day, 17th of March, traditionally the day on which St. Patrick left his mortal body in the 5th century of this current era. So why am I talking about St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, and for most of us, our patron saint? One of three, by the way, the other one being St. Bridget and St. Columcille. It is because tomorrow you may well be busy with the St. Patrick's Parade and celebrations and what have you. And I thought that it would be good to reflect on the life and impact of St. Patrick and why he is so celebrated here and abroad. Abroad because, of course, the Irish diaspora went away, and so people who hankered for their homeland, so that celebrating St. Patrick's Day through initiation of parades and what have you would be a way of making them feel that they didn't miss home so much, a way of overcoming their own homesickness. Well, of course, everyone can be homesick, but I hazard a guess that Ireland has a special kind of homesickness. We all know who live in Ireland, the beauty of Ireland, her rugged coastlines, her stunning vistas. And of course, despite the fact that the weather is a little erratic, to say the least, being on the westernmost part of Europe, gets battered by the Atlantic Ocean. And despite Brexit, importing the weather into the Britain, having first landed here in Ireland, on this island. So how do we reflect on a remarkable life that was around in such a distant period of history, the 5th century, some 1500 years ago? It seems very remote, and yet we have some reliable details, biographical details. And they are not just factual details. These are incidents worthy of reflection. And not just reflection, but since we're all on a pilgrim journey, we can see in every aspect of Patrick's life, nothing like a smoothness, a series of tragedies and victories. St. Patrick was a slave. St. Patrick was a Roman citizen. St. Patrick was a mystic, a visionary, and Patrick was a stout revolutionary, going against all the standards and norms we could think of, and laying the ground for Ireland to be the land of saints and scholars, bringing a certain settlement and a scholarliness to the whole of Europe at a time when Europe was under barbarian siege, and all the precious documents of antiquity were liable to be lost. They were smuggled into Ireland, and there's a great legacy, therefore, of Ireland's contribution toward the, if you want to call it, civilization of the whole of Europe. It was Swami Vivekananda who mentions as an outstanding attribute of Sister Nivedita, your Celtic blood. But Patrick wasn't born with Celtic blood as far as we understand it. He was born into a Romanized family, whether he was ethnically Roman or not, the Romans had ruled Britain and they left. And so at the very end of their legacy, we see a settled people in Britain with heavily influenced by Roman culture. And Patrick grew up in such an environment. He was used to being waited on. He was in a family that was, as far as we understand, reasonably wealthy. His grandfather had been a priest. His father was a deacon, probably, and was had a good reputation and so on. And we find Patrick and his family living in a part of Wales not too far from current-day Swansea, Fishguard, and so on. And it was quite easy for raiders to come in, professional people who were just looking for slaves, ruthlessly coming in, probably originating from the Celtic people and the Argyll area of Scotland, but nevertheless familiar with the dangers of the Irish Sea and the rugged countryside of Ireland. And their market was slaves, raiding villages in a very professional, systematic way, discarding those who they didn't think would fetch any price, and getting hold of the young, strong people and dumping them into their ships and taking them away around the western coast of Ireland. And Patrick was taken like that. As far as we know, probably the only, certainly from a historical point of view, the only Roman citizen that was taken as a slave. He was 16 years of age, and although he was brought up in the state religion, don't forget, in the Roman Empire was Christianity. And despite that, in his own words, his own record says, he wasn't that religious. In fact, he goes even further. He actually says he was something like a sinner, not even considering any of the standards and norms and values of his religion. So we could say he was a kind of agnostic, youthful, high-spirited boy. And at the tender age of 16, taken away, very, very roughly, very, very cruelly, and taken to a land he knew nothing about. The very, very western corner, the unknown, across hostile seas that nobody had even ventured across, normally speaking. It was as if you're going to not just a foreign land, but dark and sinister territories where rumors abounded of dragons and sinister beings. The Roman Empire itself had not gone into Ireland. And even later, once England had been conquered by the Normans in 1066, the 11th century, these Normans only arrived in Ireland in the 12th century, and on invitation and so on. That's a different part of the Irish history. So we can just imagine now, in our own life, at the age of 16, where were we? What were we doing? And here is a person taken away, roughly treated, didn't know the language, although I suppose maybe there was Welsh around, and the Welsh language is also a Celtic language, but foreign territory with foreign people, with nobody, by himself, alone, snatched away from a comfortable environment. And he was made to be a slave, treated like a slave. And there he was for 6 long years. Where was he? He was probably in the northwestern portion of Ireland. And there he records he was looking after sheep, looking after livestock, but alone. And he says, through snow, through frost, through rain, you know the Irish climate, but above all, alone and desperate. And in our own life, at these moments in time, we learn the most. When everything seems to be against us, when we seem to be alone, what does he do? in his loneliness, in his solitude, despite the weather, in a beautiful, beautiful environment, a beautiful landscape, what does he do? 100 times a day and night, he prays. And his faith becomes not only revealed, but becomes extremely strong. He has a revelation, like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, a turning point. And the fruit of his spiritual practice, his deep prayer, puts him into a connection with the divine. And the lesson for us is exactly like that. In any moment of desperation or difficulties, what should we do? We have to turn to prayer. And that requires faith. It requires enormous courage to develop that kind of faith, because you could easily take your mood and spiral downwards. You could even go into a suicidal situation, taken away from your family. You're assured you will never see them again. In a foreign life, and 6 long years he was there. But these were 6 years of development, 6 years, 6 treasured years, where he was able to get a tremendous inward connection with the divine. And that connection itself infused him with faith. And so he was inspired. He had a vision, a dream, that he would go and find a boat, and the boat would be there waiting for him. And he would go back to his people. And so it requires faith to take that seriously as well, because when you escape as a slave, it is that you are almost a criminal. And we have to understand Ireland as a very wild place. And there, although there were kings and kingdoms, the king's influence only extended, 10 kilometers or so around him. So it was an entirely rough place with many warring factions going on. And if you were identified, of course, as a runaway slave, then your life would be in danger, because if you ran away, then you would be slaughtered. And of course, the Irish understanding in those days was your head would be taken, because when you take your head, the thinking was the soul lies in the head. You cut the head off, then you take a person's soul away. So 300 kilometers, we estimate, he must have traveled on foot, being very, very careful with each moment of danger there. But he had a companion, and this companion was the divine. And he reaches the place where the boat is, and he asks the boatman, for the first time he has to reveal, I'm a runaway slave. He's taking a huge risk, but still his faith is saving him. And they say, no, we can't take you. Go away. And so he turns back a little bit. And what does he do? Resorts to prayer. And in this prayer, before he'd even finished, one of the boatmen turns around to him and says, all right, quick, let's get going. And you can imagine the long sea voyage, and eventually he makes his way back home. And it's a great surprise and a great celebration. And even today, in that particular village or that town where he was supposed to be born, 17th, tomorrow will be a big celebration. Typically, the celebration is not of his birth, but his death. The commemoration of his death is the traditional way of treating saints in Western Christian culture. St. Patrick's life is acknowledged by every single Christian religion, more or less, today. So the Eastern Orthodox Church puts St. Patrick on parallel with the apostles. Imagine. That's how highly they regard him. But what makes him so outstanding? He returns home as if he's returned from the dead, great celebrations, But 6 years has passed, and 6 years of no education. And he is inspired then to take up the monastic life. But he realizes he's way behind in meeting up with the expectations of his peers, and he has to study hard. And he suffers all through his life, really, from this lack of education. But there's the lesson for us. It's not in how many books we read. It's not in what we think of philosophically, theologically. No, it's in the experiential understanding of the inner divine. And so as he's doing this, a vision occurs. It's an Irish person appearing to him, saying, "Come back to us," and begging him to do that. And he takes this as a divine vision, and he determines that he will go back. In the meantime, of course, he has been ordained as a bishop, and we have to understand what that means. You see, in the early days of Christianity, the successors of the apostles were seen to be the leaders. And so the only successors of these apostles would be technically the episcopal, the bishops, the leaders of communities. And so priests and deacons were really just kind of assistants, if you will, but the main people would be bishops. So he was ordained like that. What does he do? He goes back into the area of trouble, back into the people where he was abused, realizing that he has something to offer. He has the capacity to consolidate everyone, to remove off rivalry, cruelty, by bringing a monotheistic religion to Ireland. And he does it not out of theology, he does it from his personal experience. And despite the 6 years, his obviously love for the country and love for the people. He knows the language by now. So he comes as a kind of missionary now, but understanding that I love the people, I love the culture. Despite everything else, there's a roughness in it. In other words, he's recognizing something that Swami Vivekananda recognized in Sister Nivedita. Your Celtic blood, something unusual, something to do with courage, determination, something to do with a willingness to adopt, a willingness to listen, a willingness to align yourself with nature. Because all the people in Ireland made that their religion. The value of springs, the value of water, the value of trees, the value of the shamrock flower, the value of the whole of nature. And so Patrick comes and takes advantage of this. And he doesn't destroy what is there. He simply adopts it. And that adoption makes an impact, because he's not speaking anything which is fundamentally culturally different. What he's doing is he's adopting, he's adapting, he's improving, and he's bringing a level of internal spirituality. And this is remarkable. And it must have appealed to the people of Ireland that there was historically a self-sacrificing person in Jesus who was willing to give his life up heroically for the salvation of the world. And so, of course, he comes with a certain level of common sense, bringing gifts to influential kings, getting in return their offering of protection for his work, not conversion, protection. He's not converting anybody. He's simply setting the example. And that itself is influential. His character is changing people. And what he's saying is changing people. And historians will say You may think he wore green. No, he probably wore blue or something of that nature. He wasn't a traditional bishop coming from the continent. He was of a different type, and his lack of education served him well. And so we see that with his great, great intensive faith, he comes fearlessly back to this island. And even when he escaped as a slave, he had no fear, because faith and fear cannot go together. They're not companions, they're the opposites of each other. Now you see, there is then a little bit of difficulty, because such a great person, jealousy will arise. And so it did. And one of the most tragic episodes in his life, despite his influence and his work, despite his integration into the community, despite making a wonderful foundation, and he wasn't the first Christian missionary to go to Ireland, but each one seemed to have been chased away. That is why he is a foundational saint of Ireland. Now you see, he was called back to Britain to face charges. An old friend of his had leveled a charge against him. We don't know what his sin was, but he was accused, and he was asked, you come and answer charges. And he goes into despair. The human St. Patrick, like all of us, falls into the situation where he nearly loses his faith completely. He goes into depression. How could this happen to him? This happened in his youth. And in humility, he accepts, I'm not perfect. He accepts, I'm a lowly sinner. Nevertheless, I am being used. I'm being used by the divine will. And he regains his courage, again, the capacity of prayer. And that saves his faith. And in saving his faith, he gains in courage and confidence sufficient to write a letter. I will not come and face charges. I have a mission. It is divinely inspired. And while all these things may be true, these accusations, these are in the past, and I am the instrument of the divine, was his attitude. And so again, we see this desperation, this difficulty, but the rescue. When something harsh occurs, when something painful occurs, don't lose your faith in yourself. Don't lose your faith in God. Don't lose your faith in your destiny, your divine destiny, which we all have. And in this way, he picks himself up and goes on. And those who called him the hierarchy, his superiors, they acknowledge, all right, they are impressed by his humility, by his saintliness. So he lays the foundation, along with Bridget and Columkille. He lays the foundation for an island which is passionately and yet nonconformist in its operation. So when we say that Celtic Christianity was there in Ireland, it was an absorption of the culture, the customs, producing holy wells. And we are in our center here, very close to one of these holy wells. A reverence for nature, for the sky, for the water, for the trees. Many legends would have grown up about St. Patrick, of course, because as time goes on, the greatness of the person gets elaborated. One story tells about the Hill of Slane, where he lights a fire, and the king of Tara lights a fire on a certain occasion and sees it as a competition. And when he goes to sort the matter out, then Patrick and all his followers somehow evaporate, they disappear. The legend of his teaching the Trinity by using the shamrock, we have no evidence that is true. He may have done, he may not have done. But later coroners will bring these legends up. And we have to admit it is an extremely unparalleled understanding or conveyance of a mystery of a Trinity, a Trinitarian deity. We have the legends of him dispatching all the snakes from Ireland, based on the fact that he dispatched much of the evil that was along there, much of the barbarism of the day. And so maybe symbolic, of course, there were never any snakes, reptiles on the land like that, because of its geographic location and so on. Despite the legends, behind all legends, behind all myths, is the solid evidence of truth. And primarily, we see the greatness of the saint that had an impact and has had an impact for hundreds and hundreds of years, to the extent that while there was no formal bestowal of sainthood in the 5th century, still is acknowledged as a tremendous saint by the key traditions in Christianity, the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, the Church of Ireland, Church of England, and so on, all acknowledge this great, great St. Patrick. Now, I wonder what his reaction would be to parades and jollity and so on in New York, in Dublin, and so on. I would imagine that he would not necessarily approve, or that he would have said, okay, but why don't you resort to something more profound? There's nothing wrong with feasting and celebrating, but why would you celebrate my poor life? Don't do that. If you really want to celebrate, emulate my spiritual life, my compassion for all beings. But nevertheless, I think it's good to celebrate anyway, because when you hear the life of such a hero, then it elevates the soul and gives us reason to lift ourselves up whenever we fall into despair or depression or anything of that nature, and resort to the one formula that always restores everything: prayer. Now we have to ask what we mean by prayer. Is it a begging process? No. Prayer at its most profound is entering into an environment of solitude, going within and listening to the quiet, profound, sweet voice of the divine. That is truly a prayer, an exchange of divine souls, if you will, an individual soul with the higher soul, until the two merge in one thing. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is Jesus' exhortation. And so Patrick gives us a profound way of examining our own life to see all the vicissitudes of life, can they be transformed? We have the capacity to transform. We are professional transformers. We can take all the vicissitudes of life. We can take our slavery and transform it into freedom. And this is what our Upanishads always tell us. They tell us that the goal is freedom. We are currently slaves. We are just as much physical slaves as we are emotional slaves, psychological slaves, environmental slaves. We have formed a restriction, a kind of defensive mechanism around ourselves. And we have decided that we will operate in a way that seems to get us out of the trouble. But this freedom always escapes us. How can we become free in the midst of slavery? How can we get out of this bondage? Our Vedanta philosophy tells us that the binding forces come into three categories. Category of light and illumination that leads us to a sense of freedom. The category of egocentricity, egocentric action that is completely around ourselves. poor me, my own problems, my own circumstances, my own difficulties. This is me, an assertion, a kind of boasting. This is who I am. Did you notice me? All of these are evidence that we are bound, that we are not free, that we are pretending to be free, and we are not. And this comes out, of course, in the social context. A desire for freedom, gender freedom, national freedom, domestic freedom. Our urge is toward freedom, to get out of the bondage of our slavery. And who have we been captivated by? We've been captivated by the forces of greed and power. We've been captivated by forces of passion, of gain, because the slave traders, they would have gone around the coast, the rugged coast, and sold humans for money. They would have made probably a very good living from it. But what would be their life? Eventually, all of these have to die. And all of us have to die. And all of us are under the tyranny of death. Is there an escape? So all the Upanishads will talk about freedom. All the Upanishads will talk about getting out of grief. All the Upanishads will teach us not only that, but the way, how to get out of it. And the way is through this understanding our primal essence, understanding our own inner self, Atman. That leads us to a faith in ourselves and a faith that all the resources around us, all the circumstances are all in our favor. Our environment is exactly conducive to self-discovery and freedom. In whatever way you look at it, how is it that we are living in what the scientists call Goldilocks conditions? Kind of at the edge, in the suburbs of our galaxy, in a small kind of environment, a solar system, with an Earth rotating in exactly the right way, giving us a variety of seasons, but giving the opportunity for organic life that culminates in a person, in a human, that has the capacity to transform discord into harmony, misfortune into good fortune for the good of all, cowardice into heroism, fear into faith. So this capacity is within us all, and it is people like St. Patrick that shows us the way. Courage, will, holiness, even despite the tyranny of jealousy from others. So often I have come across, particularly over the last few years, this monster of jealousy in others, and it has become divisive and disruptive. And so we can see how St. Patrick dealt with it. Initially going into depression, but not only lifting himself up, but allowing the divine to lift him up. And the grace that flows through all of us is accessed through this medium of solitude, prayer, with a great, great faith that comes from the reciprocal joy and warmth that the divine supplies. And so we reflect on all of these things ahead of the formal St. Patrick's Day, which is tomorrow. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and I wish you in particular a very happy and blessed and sacred St. Patrick's Day. So, Grab Banacht, blessings unto you, and Guru Maharat, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.